Good evening. My name is Karen Sheik. I am the president of the Colorado League of Women Voters Board, and I would like to welcome you to tonight's session on HR 1. We have assembled a wonderful panel to share various aspects of this legislation, and we are pleased that we have over 70 registrants for this evening's event. Just a reminder that tonight's program will be recorded and available for viewing at a later time. So if you know folks who could not attend this evening, please let them know that a link will be made available for them to watch later. The League envisions a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. In order for that to occur, however, it is imperative that voter registration and voting be convenient and secure, and that voting districts be established so that no party has an unfair advantage. Tonight, our speakers will share how these and other voting-related issues are addressed in HR 1. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. And if there is additional information that you need after tonight's presentation, please contact Beth Hendricks at the LWVCO office. And if she can't help you, I know that she'll be able to point you in the right direction. As always, we are open to providing additional presentations to address member concerns and needs. So please feel free to contact me or contact the anybody in the staff office. I would like to thank you for attending this evening. We hope that you leave knowing more than when you signed on tonight. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our legislative liaison, Andrea Wilkins, who will be our moderator for this evening and will introduce our presenters. Andrea?
Thank you, Karen. We're excited to hear from our slate of impressive speakers this evening who joined us tonight to discuss this important issue. I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Congressman Jason Crow. A former Army Ranger and lawyer, Congressman Crow represents Colorado's 6th congressional district, encompassing Aurora and parts of Adams and Douglas counties. Congressman Crow will be discussing the effort to strengthen our democracy and fight the influence of money in politics through ethics and campaign finance reform via HR 1. Congressman Crow will be delivering his remarks by video.
I ran across a woman who gave me some time to make the pitch as to why she should support me. And she told me that, I seemed like a nice guy. She liked a lot of what I had to say, but she just thought that I wouldn't be able to get anything done. That regardless of my intentions, regardless of what I wanted to do, that I wasn't able to break through the system because it was too corrupt. The odds were too stacked against any one person, and that she just thought that I would be like the same, like everybody else. That interaction actually had a huge impact on me because I got to think about the apathy, the disenchantment that lady had. Here she was just trying to raise a family, buy a home, send her kids to college, and she thought that the system would never serve her. And I've thought about that woman a lot over the last couple of years and what has led to that and how broken and dysfunctional our system is. So, whether your issue is climate change, gun violence, education, healthcare, so many of these other pressing issues, immigration reform, racial justice reform, so much of this comes down to the structural challenges to our democracy. These barriers that have been put in place that prevent our democracy, our electoral system, from giving people the representation that they deserve and that they should have and that our country needs. So we think about those different barriers, one of which is gerrymandering, people drawing districts, politicians choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians. Another is the impact of dark money, this flow of dark, unaccountable money into our election system. And yet another is ethics reform. This idea that there's a revolving door between elected officials and lobbying firms. And sometimes elected officials are more concerned with the job that they're going to get after elected office. And that's what they're thinking about when they cast a vote. And another is voting reform. The fact that it is harder in so many places throughout our country to vote now than it was just 20 or 30 years ago. That we're moving in the opposite direction in terms of voter enfranchisement. That's why HR 1, the For the People Act, is so important. That's why we have to get this bill done, because it hits on all four of those issues. It takes politics out of the way we draw our districts, so they're done by nonpartisan commissions. So it's a better reflection of our community and our democracy. So we have elected officials that represent and look like the districts that they serve, instead of choosing their own constituents. It will help cut off the flow of dark, unaccountable money in our politics, so it's voters that get to decide who represents them, not billionaires from out of state, not super PACs that flood our airwaves with attack ads. It helps strengthen our ethics laws, and it will provide access to folks to vote easily and safely. We do this already in Colorado, as a matter of fact. We have mail-in voting and automatic voter registration, and we have one of the highest levels of voter participation in the country. And it's safe, it's effective, it's bipartisan, and it actually works really, really well. So what we're talking about here is actually taking the Colorado model for redistricting, because we have nonpartisan redistricting commissions now in Colorado, and for voting, and expanding that to the rest of the country, and exporting the great things that we already do in our state. This bill makes sense. I'm incredibly proud to support it, and I hope you will join me in supporting it and advocating for others to do the same, because that's what we have to do to have the democracy that we deserve, and to start doing the big things again on all of these policy issues and all of these crises that our country faces, because our democracy and our country deserve nothing less. So thank you for the opportunity. Be safe and be well.
Yep. Damn it.
Well, thank you all for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. It's always fantastic to hear from our members of Congress, and given the busyness of their schedule, we really appreciate them taking the time to send us video messages so they can be part of this event tonight and share this information with us. So well worth bearing through some of the Zoom difficulties that we all experience from time to time. Let's see. Our next speaker is Congressman Joe Neguse, who represents Colorado's 2nd District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was elected to his first term in November 2018, becoming the first African-American member of Congress in Colorado history. He serves as a member of the House Judiciary Committee, the House Natural Resources Committee, and the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. Congressman Neguse will also be delivering remarks by video.
Hello, everyone. My name is Congressman Joe Neguse, and I'm so honored to represent Colorado's 2nd Congressional District. I want to first say thank you and offer my deepest gratitude to every one of you who've come here to learn more about H.R. 1. Additionally, I want to thank the organizers at the League of Women Voters of Colorado and President Dr. Deb Turner for inviting me here today. Our country didn't always agree on who should hold the power of the vote, but we've always dictated that the right to vote is the cornerstone of our democratic values. The right to vote is how we participate. Everyone here today stands on the shoulders of giants who came before us, who fought, sometimes literally, for this right of participation and recognition. Unfortunately, voter turnout has hit a 20-year low. We're not making it easy. There's not just one law, but many types of laws that are disenfranchising millions of voters. And that's why we must pass H.R. 1 and have it signed into law by President Biden. H.R. 1 is a bold, transformative set of reforms that will strengthen our democracy and return political power to the people. With this legislation, Congress will make it easier, not harder, for those legally eligible to vote to do so. We'll end the dominance of big money in our politics, and will ensure public officials work for the public interest. So again, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar. I'm so honored to have the opportunity to speak to you, and I wish you all continued success. Hello, everyone.
And similar to Congressman Crow, we very much appreciate Congressman Neguse sending a video message to join us this evening. Our third speaker this evening, also joining us by video, is Congressman Ed Perlmutter, who has represented Colorado's 7th District in the U.S. House of Representatives since 2006. Congressman Perlmutter is proud to represent the communities he has lived in his entire life and is focused on creating policies that give people the opportunity to pursue their own American dream. Congressman Perlmutter sits on the House Financial Services Committee, the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, the House Rules Committee, and the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. And now for a message from Congressman Perlmutter.
Hi, I'm Ed Perlmutter, Congressman for the 7th Congressional District of Colorado. And before the Congress right now is For the People Act. It is the biggest piece of legislation designed to protect our democracy that has been passed in decades. It safeguards and expands voting rights. It reduces big money in politics, and it helps to limit gerrymandering in congressional districts. John Sarbanes is the author of the bill, and it's his intention to fortify people's right to vote, one of the most sacred rights we have in America. We know from recent events that our democracy is fragile, that voting cannot be taken for granted, and that what we must do is fortify and strengthen these rights. In the face of attacks by people all across America to shrink people's right to vote, to make it more difficult, to place hurdles and obstacles in the way of people expressing their desire as to the direction of our nation. Well, I am very proud to support H.R. 1. We are working on it right now, and I expect it will be passed to the Senate within the next day or two. And there, I hope the Senate brings it up, acts on it quickly, and works to protect and preserve our democracy. Thank you very much for letting me speak virtually to you. And we hope that H.R. 1 for the people will be passed and signed by the president within the next couple months. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Ed Perlmutter.
And we do extend a thank you to Congressman Perlmutter for sending along his video message, and also his office for helping coordinate his participation and for participating in this event directly. Which brings us to our next speaker, Patrick Berger, who is a legislative assistant in Congressman Perlmutter's Washington, D.C. office, handling the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress and an issue portfolio focused on healthcare, gun violence prevention, and elections and voting. He is originally from Golden, Colorado, and graduated from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Welcome, Patrick.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and thank you all for inviting our office to give comments here and to have the opportunity to submit the video of Ed. I know he wanted to be here himself in person. He is currently on the House floor, actually voting on amendments on H.R. 1. And so we are moving quickly. Yesterday, we had a 6-hour hearing in the House Rules Committee taking up amendments to this bill. We're voting on the amendments today, and hopefully tomorrow or the day after, we're going to pass it out of the House. And so very, very exciting time and one of our top priorities for this Congress. I will say, as a Coloradan, this is especially exciting. A lot of the components of H.R. 1, a lot of the reforms that were included there were things that we pioneered in Colorado. And like the videos mentioned, Colorado really is the gold standard for election administration. Our turnout rates are, I think, the second highest nationwide in this last election, which is great to see. And we pair that with really strong election security, which is something that's really been innovated in Colorado. And a lot of the reforms that we have were actually things that we pioneered in Jefferson County and Arapahoe County and through the Colorado Secretary of State's office. So as a resident of Colorado, it really is something that we're proud to see. And looking at it broader from a nationwide perspective, we see a lot of support for the bill, a lot of public support, even among Republicans. We have a majority support, and so are very hopeful that this can be a rallying point for our nation as we bring the bring the bill through the House and onto the Senate. So a very exciting day, and want to thank you guys all for all of your continued work and all of the effort to get this passed. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Patrick. We appreciate that update and all the information. And it certainly is nice to reflect and have a reminder of how Colorado really has pioneered the way on so many of these efforts and reforms that are being taken up in HR 1. It's just fantastic to see. Thank you for being here with us. I believe we will save questions until the end. So with that, I will turn to our next speaker. Priya Pandy is the Legislative and Policy Coordinator at the League of Women Voters, where she works with the Advocacy and Litigation Department on the People Power Fair Maps campaign to end partisan gerrymandering. Thank you for being with us tonight, Priya.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to all of our amazing members of Congress who've joined us today to vocalize their support for the For the People Act. Again, my name is Priya. I'm currently a Legislative and Policy Coordinator with the League of Women Voters National Office. And we are really excited about the upcoming House vote on HR 1, the For the People Act. As an organization with the mission of empowering voters and defending democracy, the League of Women Voters is proud to support legislation that does the same. Along with passing the For the People Act, we hope that Congress will also be prioritizing the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act and also legislation granting statehood to Washington, D.C. And the reason why this HR 1 is so important to the League and our priorities is I really would like to look back at our 100-year history. The League of Women Voters has really worked to level the playing field of our election system by registering new citizens to vote, fighting unfair district maps in court, and advocating in Congress for a fair election process. And when we look back at the 2020 election, it really underscores the urgent need for transformational democracy reform. Across the nation, we saw Americans experience unprecedented levels of voter suppression, historic levels of dark money being spent to drown out the voices of everyday Americans, and rampant ethical abuses by special interests. At the same time, there are lots of great opportunities for change. We saw high levels of voter participation across the country because voters took advantage of the new ways that they could participate in our democracy through expanded vote by mail options, safe and early in-person voting options, and safe social distancing in place on election day at polling sites. And one sweeping bill, the For the People Act, addresses a lot of these problems. This historic legislation is really, it's really what we need to address some of these problems, and it really rises to the challenge of strengthening our democracy. So this brings up the question about why do we need a comprehensive democracy reform package such as the For the People Act? And it really goes back to a core value of the League that it should be easier and not harder to vote. And what HR 1 or the For the People Act does is it improves access to voting with reforms like same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration. And it's really important that we modernize the registration process through the expansion of automatic voter registration, online voter registration, and same-day voter registration. In this past election, we've seen how this impacts voter turnout, which is beneficial for folks across any party. It should not be a partisan thing to want more people to show up on election day and to participate in our democracy. And there's a lot of really great studies out there that show that programs like same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration could register up to 50 million new voters, which is just simply amazing to put it. And additionally, as election observers and partners in election protection, we've also seen firsthand the current problems in our election system that prevent the participation of eligible voters on election days. Anything from complicated registration processes, different barriers around voter ID, wrongfully purging voters, deadlines that really just vary by state and county that can be confusing for voters, recounting and audit process on ballots. And we really need a federal standard to be able to address these problems so that we can remove these barriers and again, make it more accessible for people to be able to vote. Additionally, our government needs to be responding to the will of the people and not the interests of powerful corporations and wealthy donors. We need to rebalance our system so that big money doesn't set Washington's agenda or decide who gets a seat at the table. Corruption occurs in Washington when wealthy donors and powerful interests use political money to buy influence. Without the creation of a new public financing system, there's no way to end that corruption. Passing small donor citizen-funded campaign programs, a simple and proven solution that amplifies everyday voters' voices in our elections, will ensure that ordinary people can run for office without relying on big money to participate. And so the For the People Act really includes strong provisions for improving campaign finance, strengthening government ethics, and expanding voter access and participation. And so we're really encouraged by this extraordinary and comprehensive set of reforms, and we think these are good for all Americans, and all Americans want to see these reforms pass. And I think, like my colleagues have mentioned, these ideas are not new. They have bipartisan support, and they have been enacted at the state level across the board for so many years and so successfully. So it's time that we take these standards nationally and we strengthen our democracy. So let's get the For the People Act past the finish line.
Thank you, Priya. Well said. We'll turn now to our next speaker. Samyukta Mahapadan is the campaign organizer for the League of Women Voters. Her work focuses on the League's redistricting campaign, and I believe she will talk about some ways that you all can get involved around this effort. Welcome, Samyukta.
Thanks so much. So thank you to everyone who is here. It's really wonderful to see so many faces here to discuss such an important piece of legislation. So as Andrea mentioned, I am one of the campaign organizers with the National League. So if we haven't, met before, a lot of what we do here organizing is to help support the work that's being done in the field. And so I just wanted to highlight that there have been some great opportunities to organize around HR 1 in the field, and we've seen our leagues do some pretty fantastic work. And this has included holding meetings with the representatives and the representative staff to talk about why it's so important that we get this bill passed. But there have also been some great educational events and a lot of volunteer activities that folks have participated in to get the word out about HR 1. And I think, the reason why I want to uplift these is because in the end, we know that big change happens when we start organizing at the grassroots level. And so what I want to talk about today is some opportunities for all of you on this call to get involved in some volunteer opportunities and ways to kind of stay connected to the work that's happening. With HR 1 in particular, I will say it's been really great to talk to leagues about it, because I talk to leagues with all kinds of different situations in their states, and Colorado has been such a kind of shining light in terms of voting rights, like folks have mentioned on this call today. And I talk to states where they have a lot of voter suppression bills that are coming through in the legislature right now, or they have a very difficult time working with their elected officials because there is this misalignment on, what our basic voting rights should be. And so organizing around federal legislation like HR 1 gives us the opportunity to bring all of our league members and volunteers and people across the country together to fight for legislation that will really change the lives of people all across this country. So as we're heading towards the vote, we are putting together our last volunteer opportunity through National, because we want to show just how much support there is for this bill across the country. We know that it has the votes to pass in the House, and for that we are really, really grateful. But we know that this is going to be a continuous battle, and we want to make sure that we're sending in HR 1 with rousing support to the Senate so that, our senators know just how much momentum there is behind expanding voting rights and ending corruption in our government. So tomorrow afternoon, we are going to be holding our For the People Act Friend Bank tomorrow afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern. And so this is going to be an opportunity for volunteers across the country to talk to their friends and their networks, to ask them to send a last message to their representatives telling them to support the For the People Act and to vote yes on HR 1. And we want to really push this event out to folks, because we know that the best thing that we can do is let our representatives know just how much people support this and why they're in Congress, because we know that the real job for representatives is to reflect the will of the people. So I want to invite you all to join us, and the link has been dropped in the chat. Thank you very much. And so we are going to be doing a brief training on our tool, which is called Outreach Circle. It's a relational organizing platform that allows folks to send messages to their friends via email or text or on social media. And we are encouraging folks to send those messages to people who they think would care about these issues. And I think one of the best things that we can do is to make sure that issues like voting rights and gerrymandering and campaign finance, that those issues aren't gate kept. We want to make sure that people know that they have a voice in this fight and that they should be able to talk directly to their members of Congress to tell them what they stand for. So we definitely encourage you to sign up for this so that you can get involved. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is, this is also open to people outside of the league. So if you have partners or friends who are looking for some way to plug in, if you know there are folks who are horrified by the voter suppression that's happening around the country and they're looking for something to do, we definitely encourage you to invite them to attend this. But once you join our outreach circle, which I will drop the link for in the chat right now, you'll see that there's a lot of other things that you can kind of check out as well. So there are blog posts you can read, there are other action alerts you can fill out, and there's some best practices for how to combat, misinformation on election security and other issues like that. So if you're looking for a way to learn more about how you can get involved and educate your community, this is a great way to do that. And on that note, I just wanted to, emphasize that the principle of relational organizing is that we are the best messengers for our communities and our loved ones. And so those biggest changes that we're looking for, those big structural changes, start with small conversations between friends and family. So it might seem a little bit scary to have a tough conversation with someone close to you, but that is the way that we get the change that we want, including for those big issues like corruption and gerrymandering and partisan or dark money influence in politics. So as we continue to fight against voter suppression bills and as we advocate for progressive legislation that would remove these barriers from civic participation, our goal is to build grassroots power that lasts just beyond state legislative cycles or elections, because we know that this work is ongoing. So we're really excited to be hosting this event for people to dip their toes in the water of relational organizing, get the word out about HR 1 before it comes to a vote on the floor, and to show how much power there is going into the Senate debates that are going to be coming up in the next couple months. So thank you so much to the League of Women Voters of Colorado for having us on this call. I hope to see many of you at our event tomorrow, and we'll be happy to share more things that are coming up as we head into the spring.
Thank you, Samyukta. We appreciate those remarks and strategies for ways to get involved and help push this effort ahead. I believe we have some time for a few questions. If people would like to unmute themselves and go ahead and ask, I also see maybe a question up in the chat box too. We'll try and monitor, but feel free to go ahead and unmute and direct your questions to our live speakers. To kick things off, I can start with the one that is in the chat. I don't believe it's directed to any one particular person, but it says, given the Supreme Court holding up Citizens United and the striking down of components of the Civil Rights Voting Act, what is the chance that the Supreme Court will once again suppress voting rights and continue protecting dark money in politics? I support For the People bill wholeheartedly. It will most certainly be challenged in court by some on the far right. And we certainly would appreciate thoughts and responses from any of our live speakers.
Sure, I can touch on the first part, which is how this fits into sort of the court's past rulings. And I'll give the disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer, but so take my thoughts with a grain of salt. But the way that we've structured HR 1, the For the People Act, is in line with the court's decision during Citizens United. In fact, as we're looking at the decisions that mostly coming from Justice Kennedy, listed disclosure as really a fundamental part of Congress's authority in campaign finance. That ruling did include a lot of restrictions on Congress's ability to regulate campaign finance. That's why a lot of members of Congress, my boss included, are supporting a constitutional amendment related to campaign finance reform. But HR 1 is very much taken with that view of an eventual court challenge in mind. The same, I think, can be said of HR 4, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. that one is also taken with the Shelby County decision in mind. And so that bill, which is going to come in the next few months, is going to be accompanied with several series of hearings to build the evidentiary support that's going to be needed for an eventual court challenge. So both of these bills are being taken with that in mind, and the strategy is very much aligned with that potential objection.
Thank you, Patrick. We appreciate that insight. It looks like we do have another question in the chat inquiring how the delay in the 2020 census will affect the new redistricting laws or the redistricting process.
I'm happy to answer that. I think in terms of the census data delay, that's really going to be a state-by-state basis, depending on what your state's deadlines are around for map drawing. There are some states that have constitutional or statutory deadlines that would need to be changed via a constitutional amendment or legislative action. There are other states that have very flexible candidate filing deadlines, so maps need to be drawn before candidates file for the next election, and those can be changed a lot more easily and are more flexible than a legislative or constitutional one. So I would say just look into seeing what your state's deadlines are and what are the opportunities to change that, because I think no matter what, we want to make sure we're giving legislatures, independent commissions, and citizens adequate time to be weighing in on the map drawing process so it's as transparent as possible.
Thank you, Priya. Sort of related to that, we've got a question asking how HR 1 changes partisan gerrymandering. What impacts do we expect to see there?
Great. So the way HR 1 addresses partisan gerrymandering is that it creates national criteria for redistricting and also helps create independent commissions that at this point in time, I think, wouldn't kick in until 2030. So in the next redistricting cycle, I don't know, Patrick, you're definitely an expert on this, so please feel free to weigh in, but those congressional independent commissions would kick in the 2030 redistricting cycle, but there might be an opportunity to potentially have these really important criteria in place for this year's redistricting cycle. And also another really important piece of legislation related to gerrymandering and redistricting is, of course, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So this is actually going to be the first redistricting cycle that we're going to have that won't have those Section 4 protections of the VRA that were taken out by the Shelby Court in place. So we're going to have to do redistricting without the VRA in place to protect that process. So we're really hoping to be able to also restore the John Lewis Voting Rights Act along with HR 1. So we really have strong protections in place for communities of color and just to make sure we're preserving a fair redistricting process.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that as well. I know we've had a lot of states who have been trying to fight for independent commissions or bipartisan commissions that have been, fighting losing battles in the courts. And one of the big things that HR 1 would do would make it a lot easier for folks to challenge partisan maps under the protection of HR 1. And so we know for states that have unfriendly legislatures or who might be facing an uphill battle for fair redistricting in this cycle, the passage of HR 1 would also let them challenge those maps and would force the courts to kind of expedite that process. So we're not keeping these unfair maps for several years into the cycle. So for states that are, fighting an uphill battle with redistricting reform at the state level, it provides them with some protections to challenge maps that are drawn by their legislatures. So I know we've been focusing a lot on communities of interest and why that's important. So I just wanted to highlight that aspect as well.
Thank you both for that. We've got a couple of questions that I think are getting at questions around bipartisan support and, what is anticipated in terms of, whether there is enough to get this passed and what does that look like? And also what aspects of HR 1 are anticipated to, sort of receive the most objection? What are really the, the key hot points on it, so to speak? If any of our speakers address those, that would be fantastic.
I can take the question on the partisan distribution, and so there are a couple points at play, and so the first is that among the general public, these reforms are very popular. With Republicans, it's 57% support for HR1, which is very significant. Among independents, that goes up to 68%. We don't necessarily see that broad public support translated into roll call votes. When we have the vote tomorrow or the day after, we do expect it to likely fall along party lines. That doesn't mean that all hope is lost. Once it passes through the House, the real fight is on to the Senate, where there is sort of this groundswell of support. And I think that's why sort of the friend banking and the phone banking that you're undertaking here is so important to build that level of popular support, so that especially members of the Senate, as well as members of the House, understand the need to have these types of reforms.
Thank you, Patrick. That's really helpful to kind of hear the assessment of that. Any other questions before we close out for the night? I don't see you all on one screen, so if anybody has one, it may be best to just unmute and speak up. And if not, we can go ahead and close out for the evening. And I would first and foremost like to extend a sincere thank you to all of our speakers who joined us in person and those who took the time to provide us with a video. And thank all of you for joining us for this important discussion. The passage of HR1 is incredibly important to the health of our democracy, and we appreciate your attention and engagement around this effort. Have a wonderful evening.